Good evening, one and all present in this online webinar on data management planning, which we have scheduled, especially considering the different issue related to data management for the researchers and different the people or professionals involved in managing the data at the research center or in their personal academic life when they generate lot of data. So keeping that in view, we have scheduled this webinar. As we know that research is a very complex process which involves not only the writing the research proposal, but also we generate lot of data. And while generating the data, we come across lot of planning process, different tricks. So we sometimes knowingly or unknowingly we find very difficult to manage all these data, and we come to a very situation where we find very difficult to bring some positive output. So we thought, okay, why don't we discuss about the data management planning, how we can plan this, and how we can think about what are the process to be considered before we go for manage developing any data management plan. So on this occasion, we have with us a very renowned personality in the field of data management, especially research data management, I should say, Dr. Dominic Green. She is working in at University of Edinburgh. First of all, I would like to express my sincere thanks to all of you for joining this session. And may I request all of you to please welcome Dr. Dominic Green. Uh, we all welcome you, madam, to this webinar, and we are thankful to you for accepting this our invitation to be the resource person for this webinar. Before I hand over the session to you, I would like to just brief about Dr. Dominic. Dr. Dominic is a very popular and renowned personality in the field of digital curation, and she is working as a research data specialist at University of Edinburgh, UK. In addition to leading its training program, Dominic works on DCC, that is Digital Curation Centre, funded projects, particularly those related to training and upskilling researchers and research support staff. Her background is in data science and analysis, and her research interests are grounded in the social science. She has completed her doctoral studies focused on poverty and gender studies, and her postdoctoral work focused on exploring the social and medical drives of antibiotic resistance. She has a strong interest in using data to answer important uh, societal questions and enjoys helping researchers to understand the benefits of research data management. So I guess this session is going to be very fruitful for all the researchers who are directly involved in writing the research proposal and doing the different kind of research. So once again, on behalf of all the participants, Dr. Dominic, we welcome you to this webinar. And without wasting much of the time, I request you to please take over the session. Over to you, Dr. Dominic.
Thank you so much, DP, and thank you very much for inviting me. I am really quite keen on talking about different aspects of research data management, so I'm happy to talk to you all in this introductory webinar, if you will, on data management plans. So I work at the Digital Curation Centre. I will tell you a little bit about them. I am the training lead there, where I run our training program, and I also work on some of the funded projects like DP mentioned. So I will just give you a bit of an introduction about the DCC. We were established in 2004, so we're in our 20th year of operation, and we're based in Edinburgh and Glasgow in Scotland, and we do have a colleague also working in Canada. So the DCC is one of the leading organizations in the world specializing in training and consultancy and policy making and advocacy around digital data management. We focus a lot on best practices and services provision. And with that, we have a really unique opportunity to work at national levels in the UK. We work on quite a few projects, as well as internationally. We work on a lot of European funded projects where we look at digital data management, we look at training as it relates to research data management, and with advocacy. So we have a really unique opportunity working with a lot of international consortia and schools. So it is quite unique, and we have this opportunity to talk to different organizations and different people about research data management. One thing I would like to point out is that although we are called the Digital Curation Centre, we don't curate any data ourselves. And what that means is that we ourselves don't go through the process of creating and organizing and maintaining data sets that can be accessed for later use. We're more involved in the consultancy and training aspects and best practices of digital data management. So I think that's an important point to make there. So in this webinar, I'm going to introduce you all to data management planning, and I'll walk you through some of the kinds of information that you need to understand the value of data management plans and how you support researchers in implementing data management plans. I hope offer also to give you some advice that you could give to researchers while they're working through their data management plans. And at the end of the session, I hope that you'll be able to define what data management plans are, and you'll also know that there are different resources available to support yourself and the researchers when they're working through their plans. So, but before I start talking about actually what's data management plans, I want to talk about the data lifecycle and what research data management is, because this is going to help guide this webinar on what data management planning is. So, research data management, in the words of the DCC, is that research data management is the active management and appraisal of data over the life cycle of scholarly and scientific interest. And data management, as I hope you'll see by the end of this, is a part of good research practice. And it's something that you'll do this throughout this cycle, this data life cycle here, the creation, the documentation, analysis, store, share, and preserving data. So this definition here, this life research data life cycle, this is going to guide this workshop, if you will. And I'm sure if you did more research on what research data management is, you'll see other definitions or other interpretations of it. But this is what's going to help guide this webinar. So after I give you that definition, you might be thinking, what other forms research data can take. Research data can take many different forms. It could be documents, spreadsheets, questionnaires, transcripts. It can even be audio and videotapes. It can be pictures and films. It can be a lot more. So it's more than just surveys and personal data. Research data can take on a lot of different forms. So essentially, research data are the evidence that underpins the answer to the research question, and it can be used to validate the findings regardless of the form of the data, whether it be print, digital, or physical. So when we start to talk about data management plans in the next slide, just remember that we're talking about research data in all forms. So a data management plan is essentially a brief plan that researchers start writing at the very start of the project. So before they even enter that research data life cycle, before they start data collection, it's a plan that's written at the very, very start of the project. And it should address some of the main points that's listed here on the slides, like how the data will be created and documented, who will access the data, where the data will be stored, whether during this active phase of the data lifecycle, or will it be how will it be stored during the preservation stage of the life cycle towards the end of the research project? Will you use a repository? Will it be stored in an institutional repository or will it be stored somewhere else? These are all the questions that are thought about during the development of the data management plan. The data management plans are often submitted a part of grant applications, but as I hope to show you toward in the next few slides, that these data management plans are more to do with helping the researchers themselves as they are creating and analyzing their data. It helps them to start thinking about how they will create or collect the data and subsequently how they'll analyze it and share it and store it. So, why make the data management plan? There's a lot of reasons, and I'll get into a few of them. But one of the reasons is that researchers listen to the publishers, especially the big publishers, because ultimately they're trying to publish papers in those peer reviewed journals. So, we have the big publishers like Nature that are advocating the use of the DMPs. So, for instance, at this link here on the slides, and I have shared the slides with DP so that you'll be able to access this after this webinar. But this article advocates the use of data management plans, and I think it's worth a read if you're, especially if you're a librarian or other research support staff supporting researchers, because it talks about the importance of data management plans and why we make them. So if you have the publishers that are saying yes, data management plans are useful and needed, that's one reason why we should take a look at why we make them. Funders are often requiring data management plans as well. In preparation for this webinar, I was taking a look at some of the Indian research organizations that might fund research. And I came across this one that was a partnership between India and the UK about the creative industries and cultural heritage. And while this proposal is complete, I think it's important for me to show you about how they assess the applications. So the one of the key parts of the assessment process in the very beginning, when the grant applications were submitted, was a data management plan. So you have these panel of people that are looking at the applications and seeing if a data management plan has been thought about and included in the application process. So if you want funding for really innovative research projects, a lot of times you have to develop a data management plan. And I was looking as well on the Indian government's Department of Science and Technology. There was also promotions for some open call research projects that were not only with the UK, there's some current ones there as well, but also with the European Union and as well with the German government. So if you're looking for some of these collaborative opportunities, I would, for your researchers, I would say have a look at that. But the main point here is that I know for certain that the European Union funded projects often require a data management plan as well. It's not like this UK funded project that was looking for a data management plan in the beginning of the project. The EU projects tend to ask for a data management plan the first 6 months within a project. But the key point is that for research funding for publicly funded research, you have to know what a data management plan is. Have to know how to create one as well as submit one for your projects. So because the publishers are advocating for it, and even if the funders are requiring it, that's not the only reason to make a data management plan. So I want to take you through some additional reasons that we think that researchers should develop a data management plan. So for the first point, data management plans allow informed decisions. So in the process of creating the plan, the researchers or the people involved in the research project really start to anticipate and avoid problems, because this is very much, as the name suggests, a planning step. you're starting to think about what's happening, what's going to happen throughout the project, how you're going to collect and share the data, how you're going to analyze it. So by doing this, you start to avoid any duplication of efforts. You can anticipate any issues that might come across, like data loss or security breaches, if you don't have the proper protocols in place. You really start to address some of the key points of the research data lifecycle with the data management plan. You talk about how data will be stored, which data will be stored, and hopefully by thinking about this, you avoid some of the bad aspects that can happen, like the duplication or the data loss, or even having a security breach, because you're developing the procedures very early on to ensure some consistency, to anticipate problems, and to ensure that you don't run into those problems, that the researchers don't. Um, One of the procedures that I think is not often talked about with research projects that you can identify in the data management plan is file naming conventions. And in my own experience working as a data manager on quite a large international project, is that we took a lot of time talking about the folder structure and the file naming conventions. And without having to take time once the project is started about how people will on the project will access information, where things are going to be stored. The DMP offers a great place to identify and set up what those processes will be. This will be decided really early on in the project cycle so that there aren't consistencies when the project actually does begin. Um, by doing all of these steps, um, by going through the process of developing a data management plan, the researchers save a lot of time, a lot of effort that makes their life easier so that they can get on to doing the things that they really love doing with their research projects. I would like to say also that overall, the DMP gets you thinking about and developing the strategy for the different issues within the research data lifecycle. So you're thinking about data storage, long-term preservation, how you're going to handle sensitive data if that's an issue, data retention, how is it going to be shared? Is it going to be shared during the active phase of it? As soon as you get data in and have it together, is that going to be made available? Or are you going to wait until the preservation stage after the project's complete? All of these questions can be asked and answered during the development of the data management plan. And you also even get to start thinking about the ethical and legal implications of sharing data, storing data, and collecting it. If you're collecting data during the initial phase of the research data lifecycle, if you're using secondary data, are there any implications? Are you using data that's properly licensed to be reused? All of these things you really do start to think about in the beginning of the project before you even get started when you write a data management plan. And I think that's just more examples of why developing a data management plan really does save time and effort because you're thinking about it very early on in the project. So I know that the audience here will be librarians and other research support staff. So it was important for me to include something here about your role in it and how you can support the development of data management plans. And there's a lot that librarians can offer as support for researchers, and this can include offering advice to researchers in developing the plans. And it can include collating information about DMPs. You can have templates on what to include in the plans, guidance and examples, or even having libraries of successful DMPs that researchers can browse and reuse or use for inspiration for their own data management plan. And if you're needing extra support, researchers can get more hands-on support via different training courses or consultancy services. The DCC does offer a lot of support in research data management. We are available to come in to do additional training. We also have a consultancy area where we can come in and help you even develop research data management policies for your institution. So if this is something that you're interested in, feel free to send me an email that's linked on the slides, and I'd be happy to point you in the right direction. Today, I'm going to stick to the advice that you can offer to researchers in developing their data management plans. I also talk about some example plans as well as some guidance that can be given to researchers. I think sometimes having that guidance is really helpful, as well as seeing what other data management plans look like. That's really helpful for researchers to see what they need to do to put into their plans. So there's a lot of checklists out there available for you to use when you want to give to researchers when they're creating a data management plan. I'm going to plug this one here that was created by the Digital Curation Centre. And I really like this one because what it did was it assessed existing funder requirements across the UK, the European Union, and I think it's also relevant here because there's a lot of projects available that are collaborative projects with India and those different countries. So I find that this would also be helpful. But this checklist assess different funder requirements, different data management plan templates, and other best practice to really see what should be included in plans. And so basically what it boiled down to is 13 questions on what's asked across the board. What was asked by the funders, what is asked in those various data management plan templates, and what's asked amongst different other best practices. So this checklist looks at those 13 questions. It provides prompts and pointers to help researchers get started. And it also provides some guidance on how to answer those common questions. And I really think that it's a really good checklist for researchers in creating their data management plan. So now that we've thought about the checklist and the questions that are asked within the DMP, that gets us thinking then about what's actually in the plan and what are some of the common themes. So, well, firstly, there is a description of the data that's going to be collected. And this can include the data format, the file type, or the size of the data, the volume of the data. It should also state the standards and the methodology for data collection and management. And what I mean by this is, are there different metadata standards that can be used? And by metadata, I mean the data about the data. The metadata is typically the description of the data set. So these are things like the title, the author, when it was created, who contributed to the data collection. That's what I mean when I say metadata. And there's different standards on how you write your metadata that's available. So the data management plan should also cover any ethical issues. It should take into consideration any intellectual property rights, if that's applicable. You want to highlight, for instance, any restrictions on data sharing, like embargoes. Will the data be shared after a certain period of time? In my experience, I know that sometimes researchers might like to put an embargo on their data while they're preparing their data and preparing for publication. And after an embargo period, then the data is freely available to share. So that's something also that you'll write in the data management plans. You also think about things like confidentiality, any conflicts of interest. And when I think about confidentiality, what I mean is, are you working with sensitive data, sensitive subjects, sensitive topics? Will you need consent agreements? How will you go about getting consent agreements? How will you share the sensitive data using those consent agreements? And how will you consider the confidential nature of your data? And then fourth, the data management plans should again be covering data sharing and access. And I know I probably said data sharing quite a lot, but being open with the research, especially if it's something that's publicly funded, is really quite important. A lot of the collaboration between India, UK, India, EU, there's often data sharing policies in place as well. So you want to think about the data sharing and access to that data early on as well. And there's a host of reasons why we'd like to have research open. So if you hear me talking about data sharing a lot, it's because it's something that we're really quite passionate about at the DCC. Um, um, and then finally is the strategy for long-term preservation. So typically research projects end after 3 years, after 5 years. What happens to that data when the project is has ended? Will the data be stored in institutional repositories, or will it be in some generalist repository like Zenodo where it could be maintained with licensing and things like that? And with that, the researcher, those involved in the research project, has to think about the cost that might be incurred with the long-term preservation. Is there cost, time cost, financial costs associated with depositing the data into a repository? Is it a large data set that you might need some sort of specialist repository? And to ensure that the repository will stand the test of time. Will it be available in the next 10 years or so? These are all things that we themes that is present in the data management plan, and all questions that the researcher and those involved in the researcher has to ask themselves. So after that chat, I just wanted to give you, this is another way to express the different components of the data management plan. Essentially, the data management plan should be sorted out and drafted to the different phases of the data life cycle that I showed you at the very beginning. So you're addressing components of data creation, documentation, analysis, storing, sharing, and preserving. And I quite like this figure because you're addressing the different components of the data management plan and still sticking to the research data lifecycle. So you're addressing the project description, ethical issues, roles and responsibilities for the people within the project, the documentation, the different standards, licensing, the description of the data and how it will be collected. All of those are different components in here. And as I said, I just think this is another good way to express the different components of a DMP without looking at just a block of text. So this here is actually a framework for creating a data management plan, and this comes from the University of Michigan's Inter-University Consortium for Political and Social Research, sorry. And basically, what they do is that they provide leadership and training in data access, curation, methods of analysis for social science research for that community. And some of you may provide support for other research areas outside of social sciences. But I think this is a really, really useful tool to get started with data management plans. So basically, what it does is that it explains the importance of different questions as a pointer on how to answer. So basically, it asks you within it. So at the very top, it talks about the data description. It asks you to think about why is this important? Why is this an important part of the data management plan? And it just gets the researchers thinking about what's going on and why these questions are being asked. And I really think that that's useful when they're actually doing the research, because these questions are asked and answered very early on. Additionally, the framework gives examples. This is often a frequent request that we get at the DCC. Examples about what data management plans look like, example plans in different subject areas. And I think this is really good because examples help researchers think of what to write for their own context. And again, I'll provide you some additional examples, but I just think that this is a really, really useful framework to get started with data management plans, especially for those like who don't know anything about it. And this could really help them to get started. So, in the next few slides, I'm going to talk about some planning tricks to constructing a data management plan. And we like to give these planning tricks because these are just three ways that you might think about or go about putting together the data management plans. And these could again be a part of the advice that you give to researchers when they're putting together these DMPs. So I'll just briefly describe these tricks. And the first one is to think backwards. And what I mean here when I say that is when the researchers first start a project, it's a good idea to start at the end of the life cycle, or what might be the end, that preservation stage, and identify which repository that they might want to deposit their data for long-term preservation at the very outset of the project. And I think sometimes this is easier with domain specific repositories, but there's also generalist repositories like Zenodo that could be used. But when you identify a repository, sometimes the answers to other questions in the DMP can also be answered. So sometimes the repositories themselves might have the metadata standards that they would like people who deposit data in that repository to use. They might also be able to help with the licensing. So, for instance, um, it might be a Creative Commons license that has CC BY, which means that you can reuse the data any way you want. You can modify it, you can change it, but you just have to provide attribution to the original creator. Different repositories have adopted different standards, especially if they are subject specific. So if you're working on a specific area or supporting a researcher in a specific area, this is a really good way of trying to make things easier um, by identifying the repository and seeing what requirements they have for that repository, so that all those questions can be answered um, at the very start. So thinking backwards. So don't think about collection first. Think about preservation and start from the back, and this will help answer some of those other questions. The second trick is to include all research data management stakeholders. And what we're saying here is remember that the project that the researcher is a part of is not just about the researchers. They're not the only ones involved. There's a lot of different actors in play. That includes the funders. So the funders might have their requirements for data management plans. Your host institution might have requirements for data management plans that the researcher needs to consider. um, their policies in place, what the libraries say. The publishers, of course, have policies about what data sharing should look like for their to publish in their journals. I know there's quite a few journals that have their own data sharing policy that would be helpful for the data management plan. If they already know which journals they're aiming for, taking a look at those data sharing policies for those journals would be incredibly helpful to look at. And then another thing we often don't consider, especially if we're looking at publicly funded research, but not all the research will be publicly funded. There might be some commercial partners that the project might have. So you'd also have to consider what implications that have for the different aspects of the research data lifecycle. And then one other thing is that the researchers should consider what's in the institution as well. So there's the back office, there's the librarians, like most of you, there's the IT staff, there's the front office, like the research office. All of these people should be consulted when the researcher or the research project is constructing a data management plan. So I think that's why having webinars like this is really helpful, especially for the librarians, so that you're prepared to support in any way that you can in developing a data management plan because you have the knowledge about what the institutional policies look like, what the research data management policies look like, and even what the publisher and the funders want. So I'd encourage you to encourage the researchers at your universities to seek you out for support when they're constructing their data management plan. And then the third trick, this one might sound really obvious, but I'm going to say it anyway. It's that the data management plan should be grounded in reality. And what we mean is that the plan shouldn't try to promise too much. The it should state what's currently possible based on current technologies that are available, what support is currently available to them in their institution, what's available from the funder, whoever it might be. The plan should show what the researcher and the research project is planning is actually feasible. So in the data management plan, there shouldn't be promises. It should be this is what's available and this is what I'm able to do. So then what makes a good data management plan? And what we have here on the slides are really the key points that I want to convey to you is that the plan should have clear and detailed information that's relevant to their subject area. So the researchers should ensure that they have adopted any recognized standards, again, things like the metadata standards, if possible, in their field of work. So I'll just say quickly that oftentimes some research areas might not have a specialist metadata standard. So for instance, I know that the data documentation initiative is available for the social sciences, but if they're working on a subject area that doesn't have one, then there's the Dublin core, which is more generalist. And again, metadata is just a description about the data. So that's things like the title, the author, the creator of the data, and some information about why the data was developed. If there are recognized standards, after I've said all that, if there are recognized standards in their research area, you should really encourage the researcher to use it because it will increase the value of their data because they'll be allowing interoperability of the data. And when I say that by interoperability, I mean that the data can be easily retrieved, easily processed, easily reused because other people in the same subject area are using the same standard as well. Another thing that makes a really good DMP is clear use of support services. This should be really clearly outlined. So, for instance, will they be using university storage or any domain specific repositories? Wherever possible, the researchers should be using any institutionally mandated storage for the sake of backup. That's where the data should be stored during the active phase of the research data lifecycle. Um, Having a realistic approach that's feasible to implement is another thing that makes a good DMP. Again, the plan should be grounded in reality, the third planning trick that I gave you. A good DMP also has evidence of consultation and seeking advice. So, if you remember from the second planning trip, that all the stakeholders involved in research data management should be included in the development of the data management plan. So, the researchers should evidence that you all were consulted when they were developing their plan. The plan should also have proper justification of any restrictions and costs. So if the project needs to make some caveats to the reuse of the data, so for instance, if they have to restrict access to the data to only certain parties, then they need to state in the plan why they did it and justify why in the DMP. And then finally, I think one of the key advice that we could give to researchers when they're making a data management plan is that they should take the time to reflect on what is being done and importantly, what can be done with the data management plan. Again, the data management plan is just that. It's a plan. So the project should show evidence that the time has been taken to reflect what the plan is for the research projects. One of the best pieces advice that I could give to any researcher creating data management plans or even going through the research data lifecycle is not to undervalue any research data. There's no research data that's too niche or too bad, if you will. I don't like to say research data is bad, but that might be what someone is thinking. That there is always an audience for your research data. Of course, the researcher will have to think about what data they will keep when they've gone through the research data lifecycle, what will be preserved for long term. But we shouldn't undervalue our research data. We should make a plan for the data that's going to be collected, how it's going to be collected, how we're going to analyze it, how we're going to share it. And again, there's no data too niche that wouldn't have an audience for it. So now I'm gonna run through a few examples about different components within a data management plan. So I'll give you some few statements from data management plans and talk about what's wrong with them, so that you have an idea about what's included in data management plans or how you should include them. So this example here is the information specific enough? So in the sentence that you can see on the screen, it says, we will use suitable formats to ensure that our data can be preserved and sustained over the long term. Now, if I were reviewing this data management plan, I would say that this is an example of a not so good sentence to use because it doesn't identify which standards are being used. They've not named them. It also doesn't show that they know which standards or file formats are suitable. So they really should say should provide some evidence that they have researched which standards apply for their subject area, which repositories are suitable, and if those repositories have preferences for the file formats of the data that would be deposited into that repository. And so the sentence on screen now says that the data will be made available upon request to bona fide medieval historians. Now, that is a really abstract example, but what we want to ask here is, why is this data restricted? Why are the data being restricted? Why is it only being made available upon request? There's no justification that's been provided for that. And then the question then arises, could other communities, for example, other research domains, not reuse the data as like I tried to say in the past few slides, that often that we want to promote the sharing of data, the reuse of data. So it doesn't justify why other people who aren't medieval historians who might be interested in using this data for different purposes, why they wouldn't be able to use it. It just doesn't consider any unintended reuse scenarios for this data. Again, why is the data being restricted? Another question that arises when I think about this one is, will the research team that was a part of this research project, will they be around to handle access requests to the data in the future? Because a lot of times we have postdocs working on projects who, after the projects have done, they move on to different projects and sometimes at different institutions. So, who will be around to handle those access requests? And I think a point to make here when we're thinking about that, and especially about the long term preservation and having the data available for sharing in the future, is that I want to really stress that using things like email or local storage to preserve the data is not something that we should really use, purely if we want to ensure that we don't have data loss or any security breaches. If you encourage depositing data into a repository at the end of the research project, then the researchers, the institutions, the funders don't need to worry about what happens to that data. You don't even have to worry about the request for the data, request to access the data, because that's all being handled by the repository. So thinking about the long-term preservation of the data is really important, because if the people working in the research projects aren't available to handle these requests, having a repository to manage the access to the data is a lot more feasible. It's just a lot more feasible, and people working on the research projects can move on to other projects without having to worry about that. So a better response to this, I think this would be a better response. So in this sentence, we have that we will provide MP3 audio files for online dissemination. While this is not an open format, it is well established and the most widely supported. High resolution WAV files will be used for the archival master recordings. Now, this is a great example of being clear and specific and detailed. For one thing, an actual file format is being stated as the MP3 audio files. They also recognize that this one isn't an open file format, but there's justification as to why they use it, because it's well established and widely supported, and that they will save the open format of the audio files for the archives which I think is really good. They justify their decisions. They're really clear and specific and detailed about what they will do um, during the archival phase or the preservation phase of the project. There's a lot of guidance out there about data management plans, including from our organization, but lots of other places as well. And this slide just has a few examples. And of course, if you just do a simple Google search, there will undoubtedly be a lot more examples here. But for your benefit and to save you the trouble of having to do any Google searches, there are some links here to some data management plans. There are plans from different funders and disciplines via the DCC. There's some scientific data management plans at Data One, and then there's some data management plans published in the REO Journal. Like I said, the DCC has a lot of support for data management plans, whether via webinars like this one. On the website, you'll find some really helpful, I think is helpful guides and other advisory documents and checklists for data management plans. I've linked here where you can find those different resources. So be sure to take a look at that. There's also some guidance on the different aspects of what will be included in a data management plan. So, like, what type of data will you select and keep later on for preservation? So, I would highly suggest that you take a look at all those resources that are available to everyone without cost. Another thing that we do have is a web-based tool for creating your own DMP, and that's called DMP Online. It's free to use as an individual. So you right now, DP, for instance, you can go on DMP Online and create a free account, and you can see some of the features of DMP Online and even create your own data management plan. As an institution, you would have to pay, and with that, it would be a more tailored experience with all the requirements needed for institutional level data management plans. But as an individual, if you're interested in taking a look at it, you can create an account for free and use the features of it. I'll talk about some of the main features of it, particularly if you are within an institution where you have a lot of researchers who are starting now to create data management plans, because again, they can sign up for free and create a data management plan. And if you have enough people within your institution who would find having a more personalized DMP online for your institution, that's also something the DCC can help you with. So I would definitely encourage you all as individuals to sign up and use it. So DMP Online basically provides you with a template for your data management plan. You'll be able to see that there's actual guidance notes within it. There's guidance from certain funders, from certain institutions, from certain research areas that I think is just really, really useful. I'm with University of Edinburgh, so of course, like, we have our own institutional account there. So I'm able to look at what the institutional requirements are, what the funder requirements are, and also general guidance on how to develop a data management plan. Also, there is like funder requirements for Horizon Europe. They had very specific guidance on the type of requirements for their data management plans, and all of that is there. The team at DMP Online does a really good job at providing these examples, suggested answers, and really tailoring the guidance to certain situations. um, I this brings me up to one point, because there is tailored guidance. It gives you an ability to provide examples and give suggested answers, but it highlights a point for me. This next point about it supporting multiple phases of the project, the pre project, during the project, and post project, because we consider data management plans to be um, a living document. So I said that data management plans are typically written at the very start, in fact, before a project even begins. But after that version one of the data management plan, it should be revisited throughout the course of the project and updated, because it is almost inevitable that a project will have a lot of deviations from its intended course at the beginning. So these are the things that should be documented. And we do recommend updating the DMP at least once a year throughout the course of the project, just to document these changes. And you can do that via DMP Online. I will say also that some of the funders as well do require you to give an updated version of the data management plan later on in the project. So that's something also to share with the with researchers as well, is that the DMP isn't something that you write once and then you're done with it. It can be adapted to the changes of the project, pre-project, during project, and even after the project has ended. And then just a couple of other things about DMP Online. It does provide these granular read, write, share permissions, which I think this is really useful if there are confidentiality issues, or confidential aspects of the project that you need to consider. So, for instance, if you are talking about something confidential within the data management plan, you can share it, but the people that can look at it can only read it. They can't update it, or make changes to it, which I think is a really good feature. Um, and then if you're working collaboratively, um, remember, especially if you're working across country or with different institutions, is that there's only one DMP per project. And so to do that, it has to be written collaboratively. And in many cases, if you're working on any of these projects, like the one I showed you, the partnership between India and UK, the you might see that your project partners aren't even in the same country as you. And so the DMP can provide access to the shared same document to be written and reviewed. And you can export it to different formats like Microsoft Word or PDFs, many different formats. So I'm gonna end by saying that I hope that after this you recognize that data management is a part of good practice. Whether the researcher or the research project plans to make the data open or not, we should still be creating data management plans. The data management plans benefits the researchers a lot, and the process of planning the project or planning what's going into the DMP is just as important as the plan itself. Um, and you have to think about what the desired end result of the plan is for this. The best way to approach data management plans is whatever way that best fits the project. And we should not just let funder requirements drive things. We have to make sure that our plans are always grounded in reality, what's feasible, and we have to ensure that all the research data management stakeholders involved in the research project are included from the onset in the development of the data management plan. essentially, data management is a part of good practice. And I thank you all. I thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Dominic, for a detailed presentation. I think you have covered each and every point a researcher is supposed to consider while developing the plan for his or her data. And I am 100% sure that your talk will definitely benefit the researcher for the better output, and they will make use of this lecture in their academic activity. So thank you very
Um,
much. Thank you. It is really a very beneficial talk. And now the question and answer session is open to all. If any participant is having any question, so please add the question into chat box, and uh, Dr. Dominic will attend the queries subject to the question is relevant to the talk which he has delivered. Is there anyone having any query or question related to this research data management planning? Or you can just send your question to my mail ID. I will request Dominic to, whenever she is free, she will definitely reply. I know she is very busy in her daily activity in academia, but she will definitely find some time for the questions if you have any. I think your
yes,
talk has given them
definitely.
enough input. Your talk has given them enough input, so they do not have any query or question. Uh, so,
Okay.
thank you, Dominic, for your nice
Thank
presentation. And once
you.
again, on behalf of all the participants, please accept our sincere thanks for accepting our invitation and finding the time from your busy schedule and delivering the talk. So, thank you once again, and we
Thank
will
you.
be in touch, stay in touch with you, and seek your assistance for future research development or data management planning or any question if you have, then we will definitely trouble you. So once again, thank you on
Yeah,
behalf of
no, that sounds
my audience.
good. Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye, and good day to you. So, participants, thank you once again for joining this session. We'll have another session on different topics, and I request you all that whatever the discussion has taken place today, make use of this talk. This will be available in librarian guide, and you can see later also those who could not join, but this talk will definitely help you in planning your data properly, and please use some online tools which was given by Dr. Dominic during her presentation. So it will really help you to manage your research data effectively. So with this, I conclude the session now with a lot of thanks to everyone. Please take care of yourself and family. Will connect again on some other day with some other topic. Till then, goodbye. Take care of yourself.